The morning sun shimmered across the calm waves as the massive Navy ship stood proudly at the harbor, ready for departure. Among the crowd of sailors, officers, and families saying their goodbyes, an old man in a faded navy blue jacket slowly approached the boarding ramp. His posture was straight, though his age showed in every careful step he took. His cap bore an insignia that looked old, older than most of the uniforms around him. The young Navy officer at the ramp looked at him curiously, clipboard in hand. "Sir, may I help you?" he asked politely. The old man nodded slightly and said, "I'm here to board the USS Valor." The officer glanced down at his list. "Sir, this ship is for active personnel only. I'm sorry you can't board." The veteran smiled faintly. "Son, I know the rules better than most, but I have orders to be on this ship." The officer raised a brow, his tone firming. "With all due respect, sir, only those with clearance can enter. Do you have your identification?" The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, handing over an ID card that looked decades old. The young officer frowned, confused. "This ID is from the 1980s, sir. This isn't valid anymore." The old man's eyes glistened for a moment. "That's probably the last one I ever needed. Back then, this ship wasn't even built yet. But the sea remembers its sailors." The officer sighed. "Sir, please step aside. I can't let you board." A few nearby sailors glanced over, whispering. The old man didn't argue. He just stood there quietly, looking at the ship, his gaze distant, like he was seeing ghosts from another time. Moments later, a black car pulled up near the dock. A tall figure stepped out, Admiral Lewis, one of the highest-ranking officers in the fleet. The young officer immediately straightened his posture and saluted. "Admiral on deck," he shouted. The Admiral waved it off casually and began walking toward the ship. As he approached, his eyes caught sight of the elderly man standing near the ramp. He stopped mid-stride. The air around them seemed to freeze. "God, is that really you?" the Admiral said quietly. The young officer blinked, puzzled. "Sir." The Admiral stepped closer, disbelief written all over his face. "Captain Raymond Holt." The old man smiled gently. "It's been a long time, Admiral." The Admiral's expression changed completely. He snapped to attention and gave a salute so sharp it cut through the silence. "Sir, it's an honor." The officer's jaw dropped. The Admiral turned toward him, his voice suddenly fierce. "Lieutenant, do you know who this man is? This is Captain Raymond Holt, the commanding officer of the USS Defender during Operation Silent Storm. The man who saved an entire fleet when communication was lost in hostile waters." The young officer's face turned pale. "Sir, I didn't know." The Admiral's voice softened, full of respect. "Of course you didn't. Most of the men who served under him retired before you were born." The old man chuckled softly. "Don't be too hard on him, Admiral. He's just doing his job." The Admiral nodded, but still looked at the officer with a glint of reprimand in his eyes. Captain Holt was decorated with the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, and the Distinguished Service Medal. When his destroyer took a direct hit, he refused evacuation until every man on board was safe. The Navy owes him more than we can ever repay. The young officer's throat tightened. He stood rigid, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by deep embarrassment. "Sir, I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean any disrespect." Captain Holt patted his shoulder kindly. "Son, respect isn't shown in knowing who someone was. It's shown in how you handle yourself now. You did your duty, don't lose that." The Admiral smiled at that, still the same wise leader I remember. The old man looked back at the ship. "She's a fine vessel, reminds me of the Defender, strong, proud, ready for the unknown." The Admiral's voice lowered. "We're here today to honor you, Captain. Didn't anyone tell you?" Holt looked surprised. "Honor me? For what?" "Today marks the 40th anniversary of Operation Silent Storm. The Navy wanted to name this ship's new command deck after you, but we wanted to keep it a surprise." The veteran's eyes shimmered with emotion he hadn't let anyone see for years. "I don't know what to say." The Admiral placed a hand on his shoulder. "Say nothing, sir, just come aboard." As the Admiral led him up the ramp, every sailor on deck stopped what they were doing. Conversations died out. Then one by one, the crew straightened and saluted the old man as he stepped onto the ship. The sound of boots hitting metal echoed in perfect rhythm, a living tribute. The young officer stood at the bottom of the ramp, eyes filled with awe. The old man paused halfway, turned back, and gave him a respectful nod. "Carry on, Lieutenant," he said. The words felt like a blessing. When Captain Holt reached the deck, he looked out over the endless horizon, the wind tugging at his cap. The Admiral leaned beside him. "Feels like home again, doesn't it?" The veteran smiled softly. "It never stopped being home. I may have left the sea, but the sea never left me." The Admiral chuckled quietly. "Men like you never really retire, Captain. You just sail a different kind of ocean." The veteran's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where sunlight kissed the waves like old memories reborn. "Then let this be my last voyage," he murmured, "one more step into the blue." And as the ship's horn sounded, echoing across the bay, every sailor on board stood a little taller, reminded that true legends don't need uniforms or medals. They only need hearts strong enough to serve, even when the world forgets their name. The sun rose over the harbor, its golden light spilling across the waves and glinting off the steel hull of the USS Valor. The morning air smelled of salt and diesel, and the pier buzzed with life as sailors moved in organized rhythm, preparing for deployment. Among the uniformed figures, an old man approached slowly, his steps measured, his back still straight like it had been trained by decades of discipline. He wore a faded navy blue jacket, the kind issued long ago, and a cap with an insignia dulled by time. His eyes, however, were sharp, eyes that had seen storms, war, and the endless horizon. As he reached the boarding ramp, a young Navy officer intercepted him, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, sir," the officer said with routine politeness. "I'm afraid this area is restricted to active personnel. Can I help you?" The old man nodded slightly, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to board the USS Valor." The officer blinked, flipping through his manifest. "Board, sir, are you sure? This vessel's departure is for official operations. You're not on the list." The old man smiled faintly, something nostalgic flickering in his eyes. "Son, I've boarded ships long before that list of yours was ever made. But if you need identification..." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a weathered leather wallet. Inside was an old ID card. Edges frayed, photo faded, name barely legible. The officer frowned, confused. "Sir, this ID's from..." "What? The 1980s. It's not valid anymore." "I'm sorry, I can't let you through." The old man looked past him to the ship towering before them, her hull shimmering in the sunlight like a guardian of the deep. "I understand," he said softly, "but the sea remembers her sailors even when the Navy forgets." The young officer, unsure what to make of that, shifted awkwardly. "Sir, please step aside. Orders are orders." The veteran didn't argue. He stepped back, hands folded behind him, watching as the crew moved up the ramp, each step echoing memories of a time when he'd walked those very steps himself. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes carried 1,000 untold stories. Just then, a black official car pulled up near the dock. The sound of boots and clipped voices announced the arrival of a senior figure. Admiral Lewis, a man of authority and reputation, stepped out. The officer immediately straightened. "Admiral on deck." The Admiral acknowledged him with a nod and began walking toward the ramp. As his gaze swept the scene, it landed on the elderly man standing silently to the side. The Admiral stopped. For a moment, his expression froze, disbelief flooding his features. Then, in a voice almost reverent, he asked, "Is that really you?" The young officer looked confused. "Sir?" The Admiral stepped closer, his tone almost breaking. "Captain Raymond Holt." The old man turned, a small, knowing smile spreading across his face. "It's been a long time, Lewis." For a heartbeat, the Admiral stood stunned. Then he straightened and gave a sharp salute, the kind reserved only for legends. "Captain Holt, sir, it's an honor." The officer's mouth dropped open. The Admiral turned to him, voice filled with both awe and authority. "Lieutenant, do you realize who you just stopped? This man is Captain Raymond Holt, the commanding officer of the USS Defender during Operation Silent Storm. The man who held the line when every communication failed and led his men through a dead zone alive. Without him, half the fleet wouldn't be here today." The young officer's throat went dry. "Sir, I I didn't know. The Admiral's tone softened but carried weight. Of course you didn't. Most who served under him retired before your father ever joined. The veteran chuckled quietly. Don't scold him, Lewis. He's doing his duty. That's what we trained them for. The Admiral smiled, shaking his head. You haven't changed, Captain. Still leading, still humble. Holt's eyes drifted back to the ship. She's a fine vessel, he murmured. Looks ready for anything. The Admiral's gaze followed his. You should know, Captain. We're here for you today. Didn't anyone tell you? Tell me what? Holt asked, genuinely puzzled. Today marks 40 years since Operation Silent Storm. The Navy decided to name the Valor's new command deck after you. We wanted to keep it a surprise. For a moment, Holt said nothing. His jaw tightened. His eyes misted with emotion he didn't try to hide. I don't deserve that, he whispered. The Admiral smiled warmly. You deserve far more. Then he turned to the young officer. Lieutenant, help Captain Holt aboard. The officer, now standing stiffly at attention, saluted. Yes, sir. But Holt stopped him gently. I can walk myself, son. One last time. As he stepped onto the ramp, sailors began to notice. One by one, they stopped what they were doing. Conversations faded, laughter died down, until the entire deck stood in silent formation. Then, as if guided by instinct, they all saluted. The sound of boots striking steel echoed through the harbor. The young officer at the bottom of the ramp watched in awe as the man he had just denied entry was now being honored by an entire ship's crew. Holt paused halfway up, turned and met the young officer's eyes. Carry on, Lieutenant, he said with a respectful nod. The simple words carried the weight of generations. When he reached the deck, the Admiral walked beside him. The wind lifted Holt's cap slightly, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. Feels like home again, doesn't it? The Admiral asked. Holt smiled faintly. I never really left. The sea's in my blood, Lewis. Always will be. The Admiral nodded. Men like you never fade away. You just move with the tides. Holt looked out over the endless horizon, the light shimmering across the waves like memories of sailors long gone. The tides, he said quietly, always bring you back to where you belong. The Admiral placed a hand on his shoulder. Welcome home, Captain. As the ship's horn sounded, echoing across the water, Captain Raymond Holt stood at the bow of the USS Valor, saluting the horizon. The sailors behind him stood in perfect silence, witnessing not just a man but a legacy, the living proof that time may weather the body but it never erases honor. And as his sea wind brushed against his face, the veteran closed his eyes for a brief, sacred moment. In that stillness, the ocean whispered back, welcoming its sailor home.